Hi everyone, welcome to Makers and Manufacturers with V&A Dundee. My name is Nicole Keane and I'm the creative programmer here. Firstly, I'd like to say we just have such a wonderful panel of speakers joining us tonight. And then before we get started, I wanted to draw your attention to the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen. Just to say that we encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentations using that Q&A button, and we're going to address them all at the end in the panel Q&A. Details on how to use that have been posted in the chat for you. Tonight, our chair, Penny Martin, will chat with each panellist before moving to a discussion and then an audience Q&A at the end. Before I invite our speakers on, I wanted to hand over to our new director, Leonie Bell, to do a short introduction.
Thanks.
Hi, Leonie.
Hi everyone. It's a really warm welcome from me as still a fairly newish director at V&A Dundee. We can't wait to welcome you all back into our beautiful building by the Tay in Dundee, but also being able to do these events online means that we can attract a really wide audience from lots and lots of different countries. So thanks for tuning in and joining us tonight for, as Nicole says, a really incredible panel. Before I hand over to Penny, I just wanted to touch a little bit on the Mary Quant exhibition. Many of you will know that we closed during the COVID lockdown from March to August and reopened with the Mary Quant exhibition. And we can't really think of a better exhibition to have reopened with. It just offers so much, and the delight in audiences back in the building and around the exhibition has just been so palpable as they've responded to the joy that they see in Mary Quant's clothes and accessories. But not only is it joy, it's full of ambition and it's full of unbelievable creative and technical ability. And I think anybody who knows the work of Quant is really reminded by going around the exhibition the really unparalleled scope of her achievements and the enduring legacy that they still have on fashion today. And one thing that's very, very characteristic about her is her relationship to making and to manufacture, and that's why we have such an incredible panel with us tonight. So the exhibition is on until January. If you are in Dundee and you can come and visit, we'd love to welcome you to see Mary Quant before it moves on. But I'd like to now hand over to Penny Martin, or the amazing Penny Martin, as many of us call her. Penny is editor of the fantastic The Gentlewoman, and we're just so delighted to have her with us tonight to hold what I think will be a really, really vibrant conversation across so many wonderful panel members. So welcome, Penny. Thank you once again.
Thanks very much, Leonie. Thank you, Nicole. And hello, welcome to Makers and Manufacturers, which, as Leonie just explained, is in connection with Mary Quant at V&A Dundee. I'm Penny Martin. I'm an editor and I'm a writer on fashion. And some of you might know me as the editor-in-chief of the Gentlewoman magazine. Well, I have to be honest that when I was asked to do this, part of the incentive for being here tonight was to travel up to Dundee from London, where I mainly live, to meet some old friends and also to see the tremendous Mary Quant show in the real, which of course isn't possible. However, I just wanted to say that one of the benefits of convening digitally like this is that we have members of the audience from extremely far-flung locations, East Neuk, where I'm based tonight, but also the Highlands and London. I gather we've got people from Stockholm and Berlin and Buenos Aires tonight, so who may not, let's be honest, all have been able to travel or wanted to travel to Dundee to meet our panellists, John Booth, April Crichton, Lorraine Acornley, Beca Lipscombe and Olubiyi Thomas in person. So it's my intention tonight, although I could obviously talk for Scotland, to try and keep my questions to a minimum so that there's adequate time for us to ask questions and for you to get what you came for, to talk to our star guests. So let me just share what I have prepared, or rather the V&A have helped me prepare for you tonight. Great. Well, our topic tonight is broad, isn't it? It is contemporary Scottish fashion design's relationship with manufacturing. But the angle from which we're going to approach it tonight is very specific, and that is through the prism of the Mary Quant exhibition that's on display at V&A Dundee. Well, Penny, what specifically has Mary Quant got to do with Scottish fashion, I hear you ask? Well, I'm not here tonight, we are not here tonight to try and prove any sort of spurious connections or some formal relationship between the work that you will see on display in the galleries in Dundee and with that produced by our designer panelists tonight. But that said, surely anybody who has seen the show, whether you've been to V&A Dundee or you saw it previously on display in South Kensington, you will agree with me that it bears such relevance to the present, and Leonie, of course, just said that too. Such was Quant's creative ambition and her vision and her sheer productivity that in 2 short decades, specifically in the 1950s and 60s, she'd interrogated and rethought and overhauled just about every aspect of this fashion industry that there was for the benefit of her young woman, new consumer. So from textile innovation to mass manufactured design, to retail especially, and visual merchandising, as we call it now. I'm sure it wasn't called that then, branding, I guess. To diffusion lines with big brand collaborations, such as that with alligator raincoats that we're seeing in these vitrines. To the diversification through accessories. We're seeing shoes there, obviously. But, you know, she thought of dolls, tights, girdles, pants, you name it. And then, of course, beauty lines, which became the kind of mainstay of her productivity in later decades. Even through to make up for men in 1973, which seems astonishing. The impact of that work and that vision lives on in the structure and the practices of the industry as we understand and work in it today. So what we're going to do tonight, therefore, is consider some of those strands of Quant's considerable achievement in the context of contemporary practice with the help of our expert guests. So who better to start us off on the subject of shops and retail than Beca Lipscombe? This St Martin's educated Edinburgher was creative director of her own brand until 2007, when she became one half of the excellent design practice Atelier EB, along with the Scottish artist Lucy Mackenzie. And together, they're remarkable for creating a fashion system that almost operates independently from the seasonal international fashion calendar that you and I know. One of the key themes, of course, of the Mary Quant show is how Quant flew in the face of the traditions of haute couture by selling relatively affordable, mass-manufactured clothing promoted through these energetic fashion shows that you'll see in the videos in the show were a little bit more like dance parties. And then in her Chelsea boutique, whose windows were merchandised much more like pop art installations. It was a complete revolution. And for me, the Atelier EB model with no fashion show, no conventional wholesale relationship, no bricks and mortar boutique, and instead very imaginative, creative relationships with Scottish mills and makers, and then disseminated and publicised and kind of inhabited in salons that are held in galleries and in museums instead. It's equally revolutionary and inspired. So Beca, thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
What can you tell us about it?
Thanks for having us.
I'm going to flick through your pictures and maybe you can explain what we're seeing in them.
Okay, so I think it's important to begin by saying that I am one half of Atelier EB, and my other half is my business partner and friend, the artist Lucy Mackenzie. And together we're Atelier EB, which translates from studio to E, which stands for Edinburgh, where I work and live, and B, where Lucy works and lives. She lives in Brussels. And it's really important to say that you talk about this alternative business model. It really comes from our experiences of working in our different fields, art and fashion. It's important to say that also that we respect anyone that can navigate these fields, But Lucy and I wished to create a label that was under our own set of rules that we believed in, and that we felt comfortable creating and working in. A label that doesn't cut corners and isn't exploitative. We work when we can with Scottish companies, Scottish manufacturers such as Hoyko, McRosty of Glasgow, and Begg and Co. And what we can't have made in Scotland, we then have fabricated in Belgium. So we utilise what is on our doorsteps, basically. We don't wish to impact on the environment. We take time in our design process. I think we create a collection every 2 to 3 years. And we don't take into account spring, summer, autumn, winter. And we try to put our practice on an equal footing. We try to put design and fine art on an equal footing. And you're right, we don't have fashion shows. We don't believe our clothes are right for that sort of environment. And we don't sell through department stores or boutiques. So I liken it to Mary in the sense of, I was lucky enough to see the Dundee show. And I learned that Mary had 3 bazaar boutiques in London from 1955 to 1969. And she closed all the 3 bazaar boutiques in 69 to concentrate on her deals, her licensing deals with her specialist manufacturers. And this is a bit like Atelier. We have no interest in opening a store. We would rather utilize our contacts. And this normally works by an institution or an individual inviting us to take our visiting showroom and or have an exhibition or an installation. And then we can sell direct to the public. I also think it's really important to say that we don't mass produce. So therefore we have to create art pieces that we sell at art prices that subsidize the clothing. So here in these images, so you have, these are our street vitrines that you see in a show in Moscow. And the next slide is our fake shop or faux shop. And these are artworks that really work in 2 different ways. They are artworks that allow us to display our merch, what we actually make in fashion, in tandem with being beautiful art objects. And this is important for Atelier B, that functionality and practicality is equal to beauty. So this slide exactly is our faux shop on the Cabinet Gallery's display booth at the Basel Art Fair. And they sold this fake shop to the Brandhorst Museum in Munich.
Did you?
Yeah.
In the collection?
The whole collection and the shop, yeah.
Well, let me spool back. So help the audience understand how, I've got 1 or 2, I'm lucky enough to have 1 or 2 Atelier B pieces myself. How would somebody buy one?
Okay, so slight rewind. We started as an interior design company in 2007, but it was actually in 2011 when we embarked on a project with Panel in Glasgow, and the producers Panel, that we did an exhibition on Scottish textile industry. And when we were researching, we asked ourselves the question, what can we have made in Scotland now? And this was the birth of the label. And really, what happens is that we, through our showrooms, a customer can come to our showroom, try on a garment and put in an order. And we ask that customer to pay 50% upfront. And this for us takes off the financial burden of the production. It means the customer is investing in the process. We then have this produced. And when it's ready for delivery, the customer pays 50% later, or when it's ready to deliver. And we called this delayed, delayed gratification. Yeah, exactly. And then we also understand that some of our customers love instant gratification. So we have less expensive items, i.e. sweatshirts, caps, badges that we sell online or that we have in our showrooms so the customer can take it away. But we also have a customer that perhaps isn't into wearing clothes or fashion. So we have our publications to date and our posters online as well. So yeah, the next slides show various configurations of our different showrooms that we take all over the world. This is in Belgium, for instance, and the next slide is at the Serpentine Gallery in London. And the final slide for the showroom is, oh, it's not that one, it's another one. But anyway, this should be 3 showroom slides. But yeah, these are examples of our showroom slides.
And you said earlier, you said they're investing in the process, but there's a bit of the process that precedes that, isn't there? That you might have been working with a mill or a maker for quite some time before you bring it to the installation, which is ultimately a showroom, isn't it? It's a bit like being asked to go for pre-orders before something's made.
Yeah, it just means that we don't contribute to unwanted garments in the world. Everybody that orders, it's processed purely for them. And this isn't couture in a sense. This is just thinking about the environment and creating something that's actually desired and needed, rather than adding to something that would just, like, add to the excess clothing that we find in the world today. So we purely produce on demand.
One of the striking things about the Mary Quant show for me is the way that the curators of the show had kind of incorporated the experiences of the various women in the 60s and 50s that had bought the clothes. And that was quite surprising for me. It sort of echoed a lot of the stories I would hear from, say, my mum and her friends, who would say that a trip to the Chelsea boutique was something of a rite of passage, and you could tell they were enormously proud to have bought 1 or 2 items, and that experience had been incorporated in. And for me, there's that slightly chimes with the sense of Atelier B sort of bringing the women that support this system into the communication about them, and you sort of almost turn them into kind of mini, well, I wouldn't say celebrities because it's not really your style, is it? But personalities, let's say, that they become part of your social media messaging and some of your publication projects. Can you give us a sense of the kind of imaging world around these garments that are sort of wedded to the production cycle?
Oh, I'm very flattered by what you say. Situation that's gorgeous. Yeah, Instagram is our friend. Lucy and I don't really do social media. Instagram's the only place that we take part in. But Instagram allows us to have a platform where we can show our process, show off the women or the people, because it's not just women, it's men too, that buy our clothes with their permission. We can show them. We can show our product. We can sell through Instagram, and we can advertise our showrooms and events with ease. But as you say, Lucy and I were lucky enough to see the Mary Quant show in London together. And it was a really emotional visit to an exhibition, to see all these women of a certain age standing together, discussing what Quant they wanted and desired, what Quant they bought, what Quant they made. It was really, really moving, and we were pretty emotional after we left. And I also love the way the V&A Dundee has captured the way they've handled the visual, the stories and the visual documentation of their Quant wearers. Again, for me, it feels very visceral, and it highlights the fact that clothes are important tools of empowerment. That's what I feel from the exhibition, and this is something that Atelier really believes.
So who's this we're looking at?
This is Thea. This is Thea Westrick, and this is Thea. She's an art advisor, lives in New York, and she has championed Atelier from the beginning. And this is her in her space in New York, and she is wearing our Ivan Lendl tracksuit from Enters of Tradition collection from 2015. We love Thea. She's one of our customers, and like I say, she's championed us from the beginning. She's amazing.
Thank you so much, Beca. Well,
pleasure.
Until later. As luck would have it, we've got the creative director of one of Beca's long-standing manufacturing partners, Alex Begg's own brand, Begg and Company, with us tonight in Lorraine Acornley. Can I ask you to turn your camera on, Lorraine, if you haven't already? Are you with us? So, hello.
Hi.
Hi. Well as running her own Scottish knitwear brand Esk for 3 years, this graduate of the Glasgow School of Art and then RCA has enormous experience in consulting to a wide range of manufacturing clients, from small companies concentrating on luxury product like Begg and Company, who I've just mentioned, and you can see in the next slide, and Connolly, to bigger scale companies like Joseph for 12 years, and also for big international apparel houses, including Alberta Ferretti and Pringle of Scotland. Well, Lorraine, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to visit the Quant show yet, but there's this moment in one of the videos where she's just been to New York, and she is clearly electrified by the possibilities of manufacturing at scale. And she says, let me see if I can get the quote. She says something like, she's completely unapologetic about mass manufacturing, as if there's this kind of horrendous idea that you would be producing for the high street. And I just wondered if you could sketch out, skip how many years, 50, 60 years on, can you paint us a picture of the difference between designing for a small independent design studio like the one you ran, or like Connolly or Begg, which are obviously bigger than that, and then at the other end of the spectrum for a giant international brand? We've got some pictures. These are Begg.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I would say in many respects, the working in a small studio situation actually affords you such a lot of freedom. You sort of become responsible for more aspects of the development process, from the sort of inception of the sort of concept to the realization of the product.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been really lucky, with all the kind of people that I've worked with. Even sort of, way back, Joseph, the job that I sort of consider my first.
This is Joseph here, is that right?
Yeah, that was a Joseph image. And actually, this was I guess I was actually working at Alberta Ferretti at the time. I came back to take a position at Joseph, and the design team were actually based in Paris, and I was based in London, in Sloane Avenue, and I sort of, this collection actually was the collection that we made up in Stevenage of all places, and it was the Joseph Tricot collection, and so it was a collection that was very dear to Joseph's heart, and it was very much a case of the collection needs to be ready in 2 months' time, and you'll be doing men's and women's, and off you go. So it was a bit of a baptism of fire, but I had an amazing kind of, an amazingly kind of responsive manufacturing team in Stevenage Knitting Company, who sadly no longer exist, but they were amazing, and they sort of gave me sort of studio space and let me just get on with things, and I would work really closely with their sort of I guess they were sort of sample knitters, and we'd kind of discuss ideas, and we'd kind of, it's a bit like sort of cooking in a way, we'd sort of put yarns together, we'd be quite creative, and then we'd kind of take the collection back to Joseph, and if he loved it, then brilliant, it happened. And in a way the same thing still happens, I guess, today at Connolly. We have it's a very small team, and if Isabel and myself like the product, then we make it, and there's a sort of, so I guess there's a freedom in that sort of small design studio, but I guess it also depends on your route to market, because Joseph had a big route to market. So although the design studio was small, we would actually mass produce things, because we would, we'd be kind of producing for sort of globally. So it's sort of interesting. Then a larger studio, I think often, you have a larger team, there's maybe more people to help out with various different aspects, whether it's print or embroidery or kind of, embellishment of the product. But then sometimes it can be kind of, I guess if there's more resources available, sometimes you kind of, I guess you sort of, things maybe can also become diluted as well, so with more people involved. So it's different.
Well, that's the thing that I'm mesmerised by this slide of you and Princess Anne. Before we go further, tell us what are we looking at here?
Well, Princess Anne, we had the pleasure of inviting Princess Anne to the Alex Begg mill last year. It's last year, I think, and I'm part of. She's visited before, and we presented the collection to her. So she, I think, yeah, she's always very fascinated. She's studying that piece of fabric very closely, isn't she?
And you, no doubt. That's the thing about smaller producers. You know, luxury needn't mean niche. And you know, when I visited Alex Begg myself, the place, there were looms that were devoted entirely to producing products for giant, unmentionable Parisian brands that seemed to be on all day and all night. And what I wondered was, you know, why are people specifically traveling all that way to Ayr or near Prestwick, you know, from Paris, when, you know, they've got access to Italy and to China? Can you say what is marking out Scottish manufacturing still and what it stands for?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, the Scottish textile industry has such a long, rich, diverse sort of heritage. You know, from when I think back to, you know, well, everything from sort of J.P. Coates and Paisley producing kind of, you know, threads, to Bernard Klein designing tweeds in the borders, for Chanel and Dior. You know, I think there's a sort of romanticism. There's an emotional connection and a bit of a nostalgia with Scottish product. And you know, you see it when you go to Japan. You see that every season it's almost sort of marked with the kind of almost that kind of nod to that sort of, you know, this, whether it's Scottish cashmere or Scottish Shetland, or the, you know, tartan makes an appearance. So I just think there's a sort of an affection for anything kind of heritage and honest and true that comes out of Scotland. We also have an abundant. Sorry, Penny.
So I guess that's what draws people to it. But I suppose people wouldn't stay with it if the quality wasn't there too.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think we have an abundance of raw material. We have, you know, we have this amazing soft Scottish water, which, you know, has this sort of 0 pH value and aids the finishing of the product. And people will often say, you know, why should I, you know, what's the difference between Italian cashmere and Scottish cashmere? And you know, obviously the raw material, the, you know, the fibre, all comes from the same place, but ultimately it can be in the finishing. And I've heard of Italian mills shipping over Scottish water to try and have the same kind of finish that we can have, because the handle's just different in Scotland.
Gosh, that's a great picture you paint. Well, tell us a little bit about you personally and kind of how you make it work, Lorraine. For the designers that are in the audience, you know, is it possible, you know, they may be surprised to learn that somebody has kind of both sets of clients and both kinds of scales in one portfolio. Can it happen at the same time? Or, you know, give us a sense of how one freelancer's career can contain such sort of disparate scales of production.
Do you know, I think it's a really interesting sort of question. And I think as a designer, the process is always the same, in that you're inspired by something, whether it's colour or pattern or texture or something ordinary that you might see in the street, a fallen feather or a wet pavement or something. And I think it's, in a way, I suppose the route from concept to product, you follow a similar route. So whether that's for a small niche brand or whether it's going to be rolled out kind of globally on a much bigger scale, I think the process is kind of the same. So I think it's I think it's quite interesting. I think it's, and for me, I've been a freelance designer for the majority of my career, actually, for the good 15, 18 years possibly. And I think I can always remember when I was a student at the Royal College, I remember a lady came in and she was working at Donna Karan, I think, in New York. And I was quite gobsmacked because I thought, you know, she came in, she was like, she said, she'd been in the industry for 15 years or something. And suddenly it was a realization of, God, I can have a career at this. I can have a career doing something I really love. And I think then it doesn't feel like work really. It's just a passion, and I feel really lucky actually to love what I do. So
thanks very much, Lorraine. That's great. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce you to John Booth. Scottish born, Cumbria raised and London based. You might describe John as fashion's most colourful collaborator, because he also has forged a career in consulting to a variety of different organisations, from major international labels like Fendi or Globetrotter through to British manufacturers including Sunspell and also Begg, as well as making additions for arts organisations like Studio Voltaire and also private commissions, which I'm interested to hear more about.
I'll sort you out with a mate's rate.
Yeah, we'll sort that out later. But I think what strikes me is that just in the way that Mary Quant was really fearless in translating her bold graphic style into quite surprising outcomes sometimes, into footwear, or we saw raincoats and accessories and makeup. So your sort of signature illustrations and vivid colour palette find their ways into quite unexpected forms: ceramics, rugs, clothing, scarves, luggage, and I'm sure a lot more. But I heard when I was reading through the research before tonight that actually that's quite a recent thing for you. That only started in 2015 that you began turning those drawings into 3D works and ceramics. Can you tell us about how that happened and where you saw the kind of commercial opportunity?
Well, I guess from a design point of view, it's like, in probably the same way with Mary Quant, you know what you like creating visually, and then you think of other ways in which you can apply it, almost purely for your own fun and enjoyment in a way, and almost like you, in a sort of weird way, you enjoy the challenge, thinking, would that look good applied to this surface, or how would that work? But I think I was definitely noticing, I lived with a florist at the time, and he was always saying, there's not enough like sort of cool vessels that you could put flowers in. And I was like, actually, I feel like I could think of stuff that you could do, that you could put flowers in. And I just think I've always, ever since I studied fashion print at St. Martin's, and we had really amazing illustration tutors there. And ever since studying, drawing was such a...
Name some.
Howard Tanguy.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, and Petra Borner, Neil Gilkes. But Howard Tanguy was great, and still is. We would, we were always drawing things, including garments. But it's funny that I do sort of less garments nowadays than what I used to. But it's just that with a drawing, you can draw something, and then the next challenge is, okay, how do I make this a 3D object? So I definitely was aware of the sort of fashion for ceramics at the time. So I just did an evening class in ceramics, and then I went with a vague idea of sort of wanting to translate my drawings, specifically the heads, translate that into a ceramic object. So they started off as quite a sort of slightly concave plate that you make, I do slab work, so I roll the slabs of clay out, then put it over a sort of mould to get this sort of curved shape, take it off the mould, and then start decorating it.
Tell us what we're looking at here.
Okay, so this is a collaboration that I've done last year with a London-based company called Floor Story, and these are hand-woven rugs. So the company's based in London, but obviously the rugs are woven in Nepal and in India. So again, another example of completely hand-done drawings translated into a non-hand-drawn outcome.
And typically, how would a collaboration like that start? Are you going to brands and thinking, hey, I know what I could do for you, or are they coming to you?
There's a mixture of both, actually, Penny. So sometimes I've got no shame in approaching a company that I want to work with. So this year I launched a product range with Sunspell, and I actually remember a few years ago approaching them outright, just being like, I would love to do something with you. So that's Alexis from Hot Chip wearing a Sunspell jumpsuit. So I'm not ashamed to approach companies, especially if I really love what they do, and almost in quite a sort of opportunist way could see how I want to tap into what they do. So with Sunspell, I was like, okay, really nice sort of British heritage brand that I know the quality is amazing, but I would love to sort of turn it on its head a bit and think, how could I it's almost like getting to do the most ultimate version of what you think that company could do. Without, that sounds a bit egotistical. It's like using other people's resources. But it's a mixture of both. Sometimes I get approached by companies, which is really, really nice. But other times, definitely no shame in approaching people.
And when they come to you, what are they asking for? What do they want specifically from you and nobody else?
Yeah, so often when it's collaborations, because I have my own studio practice where I'm making objects, primarily ceramics, and do drawings. Pardon me. Often companies, they want the print design. So it's quite nice to go back to what I studied. I studied print design, and it was always based on hand drawing. So it's really nice to go back to that and offer companies a hand-drawn print design.
And garment. What we're looking at here?
Yeah, so that's a cashmere printed scarf from Begg & Co. from 2019. I did a collection. I've been working with that company for over 2 years now. We've done blankets and scarves and things together. That was one of my first sort of collaborations with them.
And do you get involved in the imaging, or does it just come back like a giant surprise?
I mean, I love that. I really love that image. I think it's really nice. I mean, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. With the Sunspell stuff, for example, I was on the shoot, but it's also really nice. I think when you start working with a company, you relinquish that trust in them as well. Like, I think it's nice to know that they will present it how you want it to be. But also, that's part of the collaboration. I don't want to micromanage every part of the collaboration, so it's really nice to take the lead, for somebody else to take the lead on other parts of a collaboration.
That said, there's kind of quite a kind of a social group around you that find their way into your social media. You know, Russell Tovey, so Alex is from Fawcett.
Yeah,
that kind of adds, I suppose, to the language.
It does, it does, and it's quite nice. That one good thing with social media, it does allow for that to happen in quite an organic way, I guess. And it's a really good tool for connecting with people, isn't it? And actually, it can be used if you use it sensibly. I think it's a really good tool, and it can, you can use it in a light way.
You touched on this earlier, and you made it sound a little bit like you were following a trend, but for me, actually, you were quite prescient in the same sense that Mary Quant was in she was so good at anticipating what was about to happen, and I kind of feel a little bit like you were at the forefront of the homeware trend movement, now complete universe of homewares that are being created by much bigger brands, but with your mugs and your vases and just that kind of objecty homespunness. Are there other formats that you think you'd like to try? Are there media that you haven't mastered yet that you think would work with your...
There's so many, and I think part of my daily life is sort of fantasizing about what I would love to do next, and it's really, that's part of the fun, isn't it? But I think when, thinking of that question, one thing that I would really love to do is a women's wear project. So, because I've never really done something that would be potentially more quintessentially feminine, or, imagine doing embroideries, like designing embroideries for women's wear or something. I keep thinking of those Prada, those 3D like wilted tulips made out of fabric. I loved them. But I would love to work on some women's wear, I think. But so I'm just trying to think, okay, who do I approach about that?
Maybe they're in the audience now, John. Afterwards.
Hire me. But there's so much to do. I mean, also, even back to the homeware thing, I would love to almost collaborate with a more mass-scale manufacturer on a ceramic and see, because obviously all the studio ceramics are hand-built by me, sometimes with an assistant as well, but everything is very much by hand. I would like the challenge of sort of potentially designing something that still retains sort of integrity, but could be slightly more mass-produced. Great.
Well, watch this space. Thanks very much, John.
No problem. Thank you.
Cheers. Now, some of you might recognise our fourth panellist, April Crichton, from the Mary Quant show itself, because she's one of the talking heads that's interviewed in the film montage at the end of the show. After 20 years designing for the quintessentially Parisian brand Sonia Rykiel, and also launching its little sister diffusion line, Sonia by Sonia Rykiel, April spent a couple of seasons collaborating with Marc Jacobs in New York before founding her own fashion company, FETICHE, which is created between Paris and Glasgow. I wonder if that's one of the few brands that has Paris and Glasgow, where London, New York, Rome used to be. April, in the same sense that Quant sort of injected her youthful contemporaneity, and a bit like what we were talking about with John, the kind of colour palette and that kind of signature kind of vigour, into rather staid textile brands, you might argue, like Courtaulds yarns we see in some of the vitrines, and we saw Butterick's patterns earlier on in the presentation. You've managed to develop a signature style, a language that's very sporty, you might even say sexy, using knitwear of all things. Tell us, how on earth is that done? I'm from St Andrews, where knitwear means golf jumpers, and not in a good way. What is required to bring sort of youthfulness and the kind of traditional textile world together?
Well, I think it's just got to come from a truly particular, unique point of view about how you want to express yourself in design and as a person. I think that it's all about good design and a thought process and a unique point of view that really can conduct itself to any medium. I mean, we particularly, both myself and my colleague Orally, we met at Sonia Raquel, of course, 20 years ago, and we've always loved the medium of knit, and it's just such a fantastically, at the same time, unique, naive but expressive medium. I just think it's a wonderful wonderful thing. You can create almost, without knowing anything much about knitwear, anything fantastic. I adore it. I adore the colours. I adore the naivety of the jacquards of Intarsia. We have a particularly, I guess, graphic sensibility at FETICHE, and I just think it works so well with knits. It's also got that beautiful, sentimental attachment. I mean, I'm always had a sentimental attachment to knitwear, and foraging in vintage shops at Portobello, you do whatever. It's finding that fantastic knit piece that you adore, you love, and you keep forever. I mean, I've got all sorts of things in my wardrobe, from wonderful designer pieces to things you find in the jumble sale. But I think particularly knitwear is so fantastically expressive. I really do.
And tell us a little bit about how the work is divided between Paris and Glasgow. Is that to do with you two as designers and where you're based, or where are things made geographically? Well,
anything that, I mean, I travelled for many years to Paris. It was pretty crazy. For 20 years, I sort of travelled between Scotland and Paris. And I think having done that, and Atelier, New York, which was taking it another bit further. But it was, I guess it came to a head. I thought, well, I think we're done with that now. We need to just maybe stay closer to home. And I think I was very curious about what was possible in my hometown, really. I'd never really worked in Scotland, it was always somewhere else. So just set about finding what was around me that we could use in a creative way, and talking about knits and just searching out people which I'd heard about from friends, here, and then going to visit factories or hand knitters or kilt manufacturers, coat manufacturers, going and seeing them and talking to them and seeing what they were doing. And I'm quite curious, and I'd always love to have a look around a factory. I think you can really get a sensibility of where they're at and where they want to take their business as well. And I think that's really important, making that meeting and discussing and finding out what you can do together. I think that's really important, that face-to-face contact. And also love to have a nose and see what they're getting on with, and what they've done is beautifully for so long, and how that can then be translated into something a little bit more personal and interesting to our taste.
In the case of that factory visit, or perhaps when you're consulting or trying to get that vision, that language executed, can you describe how that happens? How do you there's obviously, you're going to them for their technical prowess and they know how to do what they do best, but that doesn't mean that they understand the contemporary language, because it's constantly reinventing itself, and you're the one with that knowledge. And I just wonder, how is that relationship negotiated? You know, if there's a mill used to knocking out twin sets, and I don't quite understand what part of it is you want to keep and what part of it you want to throw away. I just wonder how you educate without, you know, how it's negotiated.
Well, that's, I mean, it's all about design, really, isn't it? You know, and understanding the product. I mean, with the example with knitwear, I mean, I must have designed about millions of knits in my past, so you just have a natural affinity to it. And what I tend to do is I draw a lot. I do specs, but quite loose specs. I don't like the technical spec approach. And I cut up spec sheets, you know, where you draw on all your sort of sizing and how you want a piece. I mean, I've done them obviously more technically recently, because you have to be extremely sort of clear about what you're wanting. And I try things on, I pin them on, I cut up sweaters, I make them all practically myself or mentally in my head before I draw. And then, so I don't leave anything usually, hopefully, to interpretation. But then again, if you do get an accident, that's quite cool too. It's quite nice. So it's all those little accidents that do happen sometimes make it even better. But it's a bit of a process, and it depends on the manufacturer. For example, the fantastic hand knitters that we work with in Fife. I mean, it's truly an art form. It's really absolutely divine what they do. And we work with a hand knitter called Di Gilpin. And
tonight.
Such a pleasure to go and see Di in her studio and to see what she's been, the yarns she's working with, and to tell her the stories of certain stitches and their meanings. And I just think that's all so interesting and so fascinating. And then think how we might then interpret it in our way, and what we're thinking and how we'd like to style it ourselves. And then it's a lovely communication and a collaboration, I think, that brings out the best of both of people and designers and artisans. With the more larger factories, say for example, we work with a factory called Harley in Aberdeen, who have made Fair Isle sweaters for years, and I particularly adore Shetland sweaters and always have done. It's that fabulous picture of Twiggy in her little Fair Isle sweater, just love it. So that's always in my head, you know, that vision of somebody and then sort of translating it onto other people. And so the idea of having it and maybe creating it somehow is the germ, it's the seed that keeps you going, you know, and wondering how you might translate it and make it new and desirable.
Yeah, I wondered about that, and you perhaps already explained to me how it's done, but you know, you see in the Mary Quant show how dominant she was in developing who her woman was, you know. Her mannequins actually looked like her, so did the models have her hair cut. Every video she's in there kind of clambering up onto a car or kind of coming out of a river or something. She is the active woman. And I just wonder, you know, that's very specific to that time perhaps. I wonder how you have developed your own woman. You're describing the fact that you're using your own body to twirl.
No, we do. I mean, I think it's really important to do that, and then to try clothes on, and it really is about this sort of indescribable feeling, and you know, this sort of you know, you've got to really listen to yourself, I think, to be able to be a good designer and connect with what you really want to express. That's really important, first and foremost. What an amazing time to be in with Mary Quant. The energy of that time is always something I've been a huge admirer of hers, and always look fondly in the books. And you know, if we could recreate it and live in that time, it would be fabulous. So to be have taken part in the fabulous show, the V&A, was such a pleasure. But it was. It's branding is a big thing. I mean, I'm not a great lover of social media, I must say. I do find it does leave me a little cold, but Instagram has been fabulous for us. And I think being able to be clearly specific about the imagery, we love to do fantastic shoots. We do really great. We do present twice seasonally, a spring, summer, and a winter collection. And we have
salons too.
Well, we sell the collection in showrooms, but we'll contextualize very specifically. And we've had furniture made by artists who I know, love, and we get on well with. So try to create an environment that is very specific to whatever we're trying to say at the time. We collaborate with artists as well in our knitwear and our collections. It's a really important part of our language. So we try to express that as best we can in our Instagram feed, and drawings that we're doing, show people how we draw, because it's very unusual to draw still, and just to show how we create and how we process, and the limited amount of pieces we do. I mean, we only, some of the hand knits, we make 10 of each per season, that's it, and just produce very thoughtfully, very, very personally, and to have our lovely sort of we're growing season by season the clientele we have, and our little fan club, and that's really satisfying to see. And long may it last. I think as long as we are able to keep in control of it, and we take it where we want to go. That was the reason why we started FETICHE, was to create pieces that we truly love ourselves and believe in wholeheartedly, and edit each season so carefully that nothing is ever done for the sake of it or commercially any reason to be there. It's because we truly love it, we believe in it. And I think that's really the most important thing as a designer to produce work like that. Yeah.
Thank you, April.
My pleasure.
Well, with that kind of idea of this quest to capture who the contemporary customer is and who they could be, is at the heart of Olubiyi Thomas's work, who I'd like to now welcome you with us. If I just start your pictures. Since his studies at St Martin's, what unites the work of this Lagos-born, Glasgow-raised designer at the label Durienne, with his part in the 419 collective and now under his own name, is a desire to reinvent the category of menswear to represent the man who's engaged with modern notions of masculinity and also diversity and sustainability. Olubiyi, it really blew my mind at the very end of the May Quant show in the vitrines on her ingenious foray into makeup, to see makeup for men as early as 1973, when I think it was only last year that Chanel was launching makeup for men. Tell us how a contemporary designer, with chiming in with what April was just talking about a kind of modern notion of developing your customer, stays at the vanguard at this particular moment when the definitions of the things that you're just was saying were central to your brand are constantly changing and redefining themselves. How do you sort of navigate your message?
Okay. I think in terms of masculinity, I feel that my work sort of like naturally challenges like fixed notions around like relations about form and gender. Mm-hmm. Like I try and sort of like convey these ideas through like sort of like long and flowing silhouettes that sort of like relate more to like, I guess, more sort of like references to my African origins, and then mix that with like more like, I guess, tailored finishes and cuts. Are we looking at the pictures here as well? Yeah.
Well, yeah. Why don't you tell us what we're looking at? I'm sorry, I'm flicking through them. You're trying to control them.
No worries. I guess this is images from the sort of future Highlander project that I'm about to launch next year. But again, it's sort of like you've got bits of like African print with the sort of tartan, with like all these like different forms of like symbolism, and like for me, like it's just, I guess, it's sort of like veering off from like sort of like ordinary ideas around what menswear should be or what women's wear should be. I've started actually doing a bit of women's wear as well, because I think my sort of focus is more about cut. So my thing is like trying to get like a beautiful cut that fits almost anyone. And that's the sort of idea, is going away from a sort of like strict or like, you know, the idea of things being more fluid. I also do this in like, you know, in terms of like the embroidery, like floral prints are a bit more flamboyant and stuff, and like try and inject those ideas in there as well, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does, because I was interested at how you furthered some of those ideas by engaging with craft, which, you know, when I first started in fashion, whenever that was, 20 years ago, craft was sort of at the dustier end of the fashion offering. Nobody would have wanted to be associated with it. And we've just been talking about knitwear and homeware. These are all now central to what everybody's interested in. And I just wonder how your work with Scottish craftspeople, I was reading about your work with the weaver Kirsty McDougall, how that's informed your work.
Yeah, that was really interesting. So basically, I always had this idea that, like, I was basically carrying about like loads of offcuts. So like from every single project or season, I'd have like loads of scraps, and I would just keep them all in a bag, because I had this idea that one day, eventually, like when technology gets advanced enough, which obviously it has now, and it probably was before as well, but I don't really know where to look for it. I had this idea that I could break down the fabric and then recreate something else again. And Kirsty actually approached me with the idea to do some like tartan, and then it was in my SS21 salvage collection, where I had this, I guess, the idea of salvage as in salvaging like leftovers and things like that. So I approached her and I was like where can I do this? And she was like, oh, I can do it. And she specializes in like the things that are more like hand woven textiles. And like I've always been interested in that, because it's like it references like an old way of doing things, but you know, when things were more laborious, and it kind of like tends to the idea of luxury, because obviously the mass market is fast, it's completely different. So you've just got all these like thousands and thousands of like garments, and it's, for me, in terms of luxury, like it's not as special if something isn't as individual as something that's been like handcrafted or made, you know, just for you, or at a sort of small minimum, if that makes sense. So I approached Kirsty, and basically together we created this idea of reweave. So I gave her all
reweave, you said?
Yeah, reweave. So it's
what's that?
It's just the idea that like turning like old fabric into new fabric through like hand weaving, like through I guess basically they cut up like loads of strips of the fabric that you've given, and then through the warp and the weft, they reweave the fabric back into a new one. So I was mixing like natural fibers like silks, cottons, linens, wools, and that's how we came up with that sort of textile. Which I was really happy with.
And what are we seeing in this slide here then?
It's actually in the next one. So it's in the next one. So yeah, so actually Lara on the right there is actually, she's wearing one of the reweave tops. And at the end it's sort of like, it's like finished raw. So if it was your top, if you were handling the top itself, you'd be able to see all the strands and all the ends of all the different fabrics that have actually been incorporated into making that new one.
Like a very chic rag rug.
Yeah, basically, yeah, like a really chic rag rug, yeah.
Tell us about this one.
So this is in collaboration with an artist called Holly Vaughan, and Holly Vaughan is like she's really well traveled. She sort of lived all over the world, and she created these like amazing sort of like photographic prints from like her dancing and her movement, as in that was her idea of sort of like staying in one place, if that makes any sense, as in because she traveled so much, which sort of like linked to, you know, the ideas around like multiculturalism and the world being a bit more global. We sort of collaborated on this print, and it was taken from some of her work, and after it was printed, I sort of looked at it and it looked amazing, but at the same time it was like, it had that sort of like digital print effect where everything's, you know, it just looked very flat. So we reworked into it with like hand embroidery to give it more texture and to bring it back to that, you know, that sort of idea of like things that are more hand finished, and if that makes sense.
It's interesting that you're venturing into women's wear, because we keep hearing that menswear as a category is very hard hit right now. I don't know whether you agree or that's been your finding this year. Tell us some good news. What are you working on right now? And you mentioned the Future Highland project. Is that something that's for next season, or?
Yeah. So I'm going to try and launch that next year. And again, actually, myself and Kirsty are working together again. So right now I've been working on this, I guess, a tartan of some sort. But the tartan is really personal to my sort of like upbringing. Because obviously I was, brought up in Glasgow, and there's a massive, obviously everyone knows, massive football culture in terms of like Celtic, Rangers. And it's just funny, obviously my family are like Nigerian, so the colours for the Nigerian flag are green and white. And it just so happens that the colours for Celtic are also green and white. So
they're an interest.
Yeah, so again, it was this idea that, like, as I was like, when I was growing up, there was like, I didn't really have like anywhere to turn to in terms of like sort of cultural like identity within like Scottish history, or like in comparison to like sort of like Black British people in London, where they've got like Windrush and like they've got reggae, they've got all these different things that have sort of like emerged out of this culture clash. But there wasn't really this culture clash of like Scottish and Nigerian in Glasgow. It was just us. So I thought it'd be a really interesting idea again to build the fabric from scratch, because nothing else existed like it. So, and I also incorporated going to incorporate the sort of Glasgow City tartan as well, which is like sort of navy and pink. And it's, I guess the Future Highlander is based on the 80s classic. It's like the Highlander film, which is this sort of like immortal character that's like, born in the 16th century in the Highlands, and then he's like current day he's in New York, and it was in the 80s. And for me, this is quite interesting because it reflects on like, I've got a massive passion for like all things vintage and antique, so I could play around with like different times, like time frames, like go from 18th century to now in terms of the research and stuff. So that's pretty exciting.
Well, maybe there's a future strip collaboration for you too, who knows. Thank you very much for that.
Yes.
Now, let me see. Well, audience, you've patiently listened to all my questions, but now it's time for what you came for, which is to talk to our star guests yourselves. And I think my colleague Nicole has been watching the chat box very carefully for all your questions. So Nicole, can you help us out? Do we have some questions for our panel from the audience?
Yes, we do. We have our first question, which is there anyone from the panelists that you would like to collaborate with, Penny?
I can't choose. I have actually collaborated with Beca. We did a story in the Gentlewoman in 2013, which was about Scottish textiles and some of the challenges that it was presented with in terms of closures of factories and then also some of the examples of best practice as well about what was happening. So maybe I can turn that around on the panel and say, what do you think is the case now? What are the challenges and opportunities in Scottish fashion for collaborating with manufacturing, and what's stopping it happening too?
If we want to just invite all the panelists to turn their video and audio back on, I think we're just almost there. There we go.
Come on, Beca, you're dying to.
Okay. Yeah, I can start the riot. As an insider, Scotland really barters on. It depends on tourism. We know it. It's a fact. But what
what do you mean? It depends on relies on tourism.
For its economy, sorry. For its economy, it relies on tourism. And we often use the textile industry as part of Scotland's cultural capital. Mm-hmm. Yet there's very little investment from the government into the factories, the last factories that we have left. You know, if it was Japan, they would protect these companies. In Japan, they see their artisans as national treasures, and in a sense, if we're going to barter on this this visual and this industry, we have to support it, or we're going to lose it all that knowledge, all that wisdom. And I really, really feel that if you think and care about the people that make your clothes, that in turn influences the customer, and in turn they will influence the industry.
That's well put, for definite. Because everything that we're talking about tonight, we're all saying we've all got a lot of love for these industry, you know, the industry in Scotland, and we appreciate how amazing it is. So it would be a real shame if that wasn't invested in, which I guess it's sort of, this is a really tough time, but it would be such a shame. Like, exactly, really good point about the Japanese thing as well, where that sort of artisanal approach is really, really cherished. And it's a really good point, Becca. It's just sort of doesn't feel like it is, but in Scotland, it could be a okay thing. It's a shame. What do you think, Lorraine?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And I think, actually you're almost more likely to see made in Scotland products in Japan than you are likely to see it in Scotland, which is a real shame. I know that there's the store Mitsukoshi in Japan has its own centennial tartan registered now, and it's permanently preserved in the National Records of Scotland. And it's like every season you see the Shetland sweaters come out, that kind of Ivy League kind of nod comes out in Japan, and it's that kind of lovely sort of sartorial kind of celebration of all things kind of heritage and Scottish, and I just think we just don't sometimes. I feel like we don't see what we have.
No, I'm hopeful though. I'm hopeful. I think there's a lot more conversation about it. That only can help. I think we just need to do it and do it well and celebrate it. I'm hopeful. I think we should. It's been a lot more talked about recently in the last two to 3 years, I'd say. So let's get it done. Let's make it happen.
And why do you think that is? What you've obviously talked about a 20-year.
I think a lot of people are interested in where the clothes are made now. There's a lot more conversation about it, especially with young people. My daughter, who's 18, I think they really want to know, and they feel responsible about it. And I think that can only be good. You have to listen. And I feel really positive about it. And you just got to take action, and hopefully the conversation will come around to money and people putting money into this. I mean, sadly we've lost so much. I mean, on the borders, it's incredible the amount of knitwear factories which have gone under. I mean, there's only like a handful now. It's terrible. It's obscene, but it's not lost. So we just need to keep plugging away, I think, and inspire other students and other people to stay here and to see what possibilities there are. I think it could. There's a lot to be positive about as well.
Is that an opportunity then for companies that are hard hit to incorporate into their imaging the actual process? It's interesting that Begg and Company certainly have been making small films. I know because we were involved in making some of them. And then recently Burberry, and you're starting to see in the factories a little bit more. And I wonder whether it is in service of this that companies do, so that it's not some romantic notion that's just about heather and whiskey droplets on in the breeze and sort of this idea of Scottishness, but actually real people making things who are paid a decent wage and the handle of the fabric from the lovely water, etc.
I think it's balance. I think it's sorry.
No, go for it.
I think it's about a balance. The problem with factories is sampling is incredibly costly. So this idea that the designer goes to the factory and has great designs and that helps the factory, that's an illusion. Really, it's a bit like what we were saying before, that actually it's looking at the factory and seeing what they make beautifully and then designing around that process. But the sampling process is expensive, so they can't really do that. And we need a balance. We need a balance of the independent with the conglomerates. That's what keeps the factory going. The problem is that, for instance, in our industry, Marks and Spencer's used to produce with most of our knitwear companies in Scotland. And of course, when they went overseas, they pulled the plug and all the factories had their eggs in one basket. We have to make sure that our factories have their eggs in many baskets, and it's a mixture of the hierarchy of the design world. So it's about balance. It's complex.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you, Becca, with that, because so many. I mean, we find it, with various different sort of scenarios, but so many knitwear manufacturers have actually, they've sold their machines to Japan, or they've sold their machines to China, or they've sold them to Italy, and now we're kind of there are only a few left who are really kind of prepared to kind of be agile and be kind of, every mill has its own specialism. I think, I completely agree with April as well. You have to kind of find what your factory's good at and then utilize that in the design process. Yeah. And there are some factories that are they're kind of maybe slightly set in their ways and stuck and kind of. And I think it's really it's hard to find mills who will, as a designer, really kind of embrace your ideas and your kind of and the challenges. And I think actually for me, with Begg and Co, it was really mind-blowing for me to be able to kind of work with them and have the support of Alex Begg, and really they're a really dynamic factory, a mill who are not like any other that I've ever worked with.
Totally, yeah. With Hoyco and McRosty of Glasgow. Yeah, it's amazing how many dynamic companies there are, but it's hard to utilise, and it's hard for them to spread what they can do elsewhere. So I hear lots of people are frustrated because they can't work with them, but all I can suggest is that you build a rapport with them, and you get them on site. They don't have to work with Atelier, they really don't. They make no money from us. But it's about a relationship and an understanding and a respect.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Nicole.
Yeah, I was going to jump in with another question. I think there's a few questions around quarantine consumption, and maybe that's brought about a serious rethink about value and buy to last and thoughtful consumption and quality. But then there's also kind of a secondary question that's about commenting on when you mentioned not making unwanted clothes, Becca, and like how we can really embed that and advocate this in approaches from factory to designer.
That's a big question, and one we are often asked. If I'm honest, I have no idea how fashion could be more sustainable. But what I do know is that I have an idea, or we have an idea of how we wish Atelier to conduct itself. And ethicality and sustainability are a given in our practice. It's not a marketing ploy. It's not something we add in. This is actually what we do. It is the design process. So I think if more people thought like that it isn't a buzzword or a moment, perhaps that would help things. But I have no other answers other than Lucy and I create something that we fully believe in, and we do it with integrity.
Well, it's like, sorry to put in, it's like what April said, something a bit more positive in terms of like newer consumers, like younger generation are becoming a bit more ethically minded with where they're, with where things are made and how they're made. Because I guess all this, what we're talking about, has been much more spoken about nowadays. It's much more at the forefront. So I guess a positive thing is hopefully people continue to think about that and think, like being mindful of what it is they're buying. Hopefully they are investing in better quality, or they're looking at the label, they're seeing where this is made, and they're seeing that hopefully, I guess it's about educating people as well about where things are manufactured. It'd be nice to have more clarity about that. Even maybe manufacturers almost have, like what you're doing at Begg and Co, Lorraine, almost showing more behind the scenes in terms of the mechanics and how things are actually made, and even talking about the numbers in which these are made. Like, I would rather buy a jumper that only 20 of them were made. But then the other problem is bigger factories have bigger minimums, don't they? So there is all of this kind of a bit of a big question. You know, it's a big thing.
I know, and I think Begg & Co it's another, you know, it's probably we probably historically haven't really shouted about any of the kind of the sustainability sort of aspects of the business. It's something we've always done, like you say, Beca, and you know, we have a Swedish owner, and it's very, very dear to her heart, and it's ingrained in all of the business. And I think, you know, sometimes again, I guess it's become fashionable to talk about it and market it, but it's always something that's been there with Begg & Co. And I think we are, you know, we have and with Alex Begg, we have, you know, sustainability managers who, you know, who absolutely make sure that everything is transparent. So it's confidence. It gives the consumer and the customer confidence as well, and I think that's really important, and honesty.
Yeah, I was gonna also add that, like, I think there are like new ideas around luxury that are being formed. I think that, you know, like when you go to the high street, the difference between, like, you know, when you buy into something that like 50 or 100 other people have the same thing, like buying something that's been like worked on by like fewer people and there's like a limited number of those things, is more appealing to people, because obviously now people are buying into ideas about sustainability and ideas about things that are ethical. And obviously if you know, because of capitalism, you know, it drives the market up so much where like the amount of production that's happening is just is too much. So it's like it just makes more sense. Like if I know that like this has come from a good place, then I'm willing to spend more money on it. And that's the problem, is changing consumer habits and like if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally.
Of course.
So I think we're all in agreement that if the consumer thinks and cares about who makes their clothing, that then will feed
into the industry.
Absolutely, you know, and that's, you know, it's the consumer that can actually make the change rather than the industry. The industry is led by the consumer.
I see some sort of reaction to each other, which is obviously, it's tough. But I think it's actually positive. I don't know.
I think I would agree to some extent, but we had a really interesting set of panel discussions a few weeks ago called Rethinking Fashion that were really focused on sustainability. And one of the things that had come out is that putting all that burden on the individual consumer kind of lets like large organisations get away scot-free, and actually they have more power to change the way that those structures work, rather than kind of individual consumers being expected to make that change on a one.
These decisions and choices need to come from the top end rather than from. They need to come upwards, downwards rather than down. I don't know.
I feel it needs to be a bit of both, really.
Like it's more of a dance. I feel like it's more of a sort of like a rally back and forth, as in like the industry sort of like adapts to like the consumer, and then the consumer adapts to the industry. So like right now, people are focused on like spending more money on less stuff. You know what I mean? I think.
But are they though? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've got like, I've got like, I talk to my interns every day. I've got like, some of them are studying at Central St. Martin's and LCF, and like their attitudes towards clothing, they're all like 20, 21, and their attitudes towards clothing is completely different from my attitude towards clothing when I was studying, when I was their age. So I think there's definitely is some sort of progression for sure. And I think you can also see that in the market. Like it's quite obvious that right now there's like there's just like, there is a massive wave of like, you know, being more ethical and being more transparent in your process and the way you do things, so that it actually educates the consumer so they actually know what they're buying.
But meanwhile, all the big companies are kind of using it to address their direct-to-consumer business. And I think that's what's going to have an enormous change, whatever the processes are. Whilst all this good work is happening, I think that the move might come from another direction, perhaps.
And there's an interesting question about how you create relationships that lead to collaboration. Has anyone got any comments on that?
In what sense?
I think quite broadly, you know, I guess some of it must be serendipity as well, but it's, you know,
connections, isn't it? It's about making potentially
classic,
social connections.
Yeah.
I think
John and I.
And I think just being curious and following your heart and what you love, and that naturally leads to people that are, have like interests in common. I think it's you've got to follow that intuitive drive. I think that's the heart of everything. It really will happen, and you'll make kind of choices along the way. But ultimately, I think it will drive.
But it's a nice thing ultimately to work with people in a sort of in a celebratory way, or it's collaborating is a good thing essentially, isn't it? If you both bring different things to the table, it's a good thing, and it actually, I don't know, it's just quite a joyous thing to do as a human being. Work with somebody else, it's nice.
Especially at the moment,
the workload as well. Share the responsibility.
Oh, and John, we met through a mutual friend, didn't we? And I love John's ceramics and I loved his illustrations. And when we met each other, I was like, well, we've got to do something together, because we got on like a house on fire. So sometimes it's just as simple as that. It's a conversation, and
it's a nice thing.
Let's go have a cup of tea.
Yeah, it should be a nice thing. At best it should be, but it could also be challenging in a good way, and hopefully educational for both parties. A mixture of things.
I think you said it really well when you were talking through your slides, John, about not feeling any kind of shame in just approaching people that you like to ask to work with them.
Yeah, I get a lot of no's every week. I'm like, should we do something? Nah, oh well. The worst that can happen is a no, isn't it?
Yeah.
A bit of a bash to your ego.
Tiny knockback, get up, carry on. We've got another question asking about taking the leap into manufacturing, and if you had any advice or tips for somebody struggling to take that leap because of kind of cost implications or quantity implications, or that becoming quite a difficult thing to manage.
Yeah, I think it is quite intimidating having the right language for certain manufacturers. I mean, I was all very naive at the beginning of it, but you learn by doing, don't you? I mean, and everybody's fairly nice. Generally, I was sort of stuck in a design office for years, not really having much contact other than a lovely atelier, which is a very privileged position. But being out in the real world and approaching manufacturers is quite a different experience, and it's the real world, they only care generally. It's about numbers, So learning to have the right conversation or the right language that, is a bit of inspiring chat, and, you've got to hustle, basically, and learn how to do it pretty quickly. Yeah.
Not to get too technical, but I think when I first started out, I was just sort of turning up to factories or manufacturers with would you call it, like samples and stuff. And I think having like tech packs and like being able to communicate what you're trying to design or make is quite like a key thing, I think, so that you can communicate to the manufacturers what you want to make.
It's hard. It's like Beca said, sampling is expensive, isn't it? And again, these minimums, as somebody starting out, how do you get your head around that? It's quite a lot of pressure.
It is, and I think actually that's the difference between sort of knit and weave as well, because when you knit something and you sample a knitted garment, you can make one of, and it's not such a huge, yes, you might, if you're using cashmere, you might spend, 200 quid on a kilo of yarn or something, and you have the make cost, etc., on top of it, which is generally 50%, or it's, double what the product would cost. But with weaving, if you're going to weave some cloth, you can't just weave, one of something. You're into like big numbers. You're into 50, scarves or 20 blankets, and then suddenly that becomes quite prohibitive. And I think also you have, it also as a designer, you're almost making a leap into committing to something that you don't know. It's just kind of it's in your imagination at the moment, or on a sketch or on a drawing, and actually you don't, you're committing to this huge kind of it's a financial commitment before you even know if it's going to work.
Brave.
It's frightening.
The way that Atelier look at this is we often ask the companies we work with, what do you have left over? what do you have in your stock room, rather than having to order something for us specifically. So we try to use up what's already there, maybe what's last season that's been left over. And just so you know, John, we have drawers full of rejection letters. It's not alone in rejection.
It's healthy, isn't it?
One day we're going to have an exhibition of them all.
I think that's rad. I like that, because I think that's just good for anybody. I guess an answer to the question, people are saying about, like, how would you start out and how can you kind of make a name for yourself in the industry? There is going to be a lot of knockbacks, isn't there? And there still is, even when,
But honestly, we've all started out through assisting somebody working in a company, observing their professional relationships, emulating them, to be a decent professional person to work with, and not having something else. But that's how it starts. But it doesn't come out of nowhere. It wouldn't be fair to young designers that it does.
No.
Often they've looked at somebody else and thought, how do they do it?
Yeah, it's good. It's good to talk about this, isn't it? Because I feel like nobody really tells you this in art school, do they? They don't tell you, by the way, you're going to get knocked back all the time. You're going to feel like you don't know what you're doing all the time. I still don't really feel like I know what I'm doing, but it's still part of it, isn't it? It's fun.
I know.
Learning to have a very thick skin is absolutely fundamental. And learning how to use stock service, is very good.
Absolutely.
What have you got in stock? Okay, I'll have it.
I like that. No, I really like that. I think that's a really good bit of advice.
Vertical factories and stock service is,
No, I think that's really good. But moving forward, that is a really good thing, just to do ethically, like environmentally, and for your own finances as well. Isn't it?
Being resourceful, basically.
And I guess, I don't know, like, sort of working within some limited, there has to be limitations unless you've got a huge pot of money. But I think even if you did have a huge pot of money, it doesn't guarantee success in design.
I don't think it would bring the best out in one anyway. I think having and a brief it's really helpful. It makes you think for harder and faster. I think it's good.
And that's a good thing.
I think we probably only really have time for one more question. And I'm going to go with, firstly, thank you to all the designers for sharing your insights.
Thank you.
What more would you like to see from manufacturers or producers to help you realise your design visions?
Sorry, what was the start of that?
Initially they said thank you to all the designers for sharing your insights. What more would you like to see from manufacturers and producers to help you realise your visions?
I guess an openness to new ideas.
A certain amount of flexibility and open-mindedness, maybe a little bit more, risk-taking, but,
That you just keep working with us?
A yes would be nice, just a yes.
That they stay open, that they, there's so many things to think about. I really respect anybody that can run a factory. It's, we could design anything we wanted. We're the designers, but unless we've got somebody to make it for us, we're redundant. So, all hail to the factories.
Yeah. That's where the mutual relationship comes in. It's a mutual thing. It has to be mutually beneficial and mutually good, doesn't it? And that's important. I guess good communication, openness for doing things, working collaboratively.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a really good sentiment. Yeah, communication. Yeah.
Good communication, clarity with prices, clarity with numbers.
Exactly.
It's all comes. It's bad. I was thinking about prices and numbers.
I know, boring but necessary. You need to know.
For a business point of view, for definite.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that is probably a nice place to end. I just want to say thank you to Penny and to all of our panelists. You've all been absolutely fabulous to have. I think we've been having some lovely comments come through in the chat. Many people have said how wonderful the talk has been, so thank you all for your time. And I think that's it, really. If you want to just turn your videos and audios off, we'll call you on there.
One last, the Mary Quant show, of course, is on until the 17th of January, and it's essential to book in order to gain access, and it's well worth it. Do it.
Amazing.
Get to Dundee, get up to Dundee.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, until Scottish Guidance tells you can. Tier 3.
Yes.
Thank you once again. It was lovely to have you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye.